What if one morning, after a simple day of farming and selling at the market, your whole life changed with just 2 little lines on a test? That's exactly what happened to Linda. From sudden fatigue to the thrilling discovery of her first pregnancy, and the heartwarming ultrasound that confirmed their tiny miracle, this is a story of love, joy, and new beginnings. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow Linda and Quang's beautiful journey into parenthood. Let's dive into this touching and unforgettable moment that transformed their world forever. The morning sun had barely risen when Linda and Quang finished their usual routine on the farm. Together, they had spent hours harvesting fresh vegetables under the soft, golden light that spilled across the fields. Their hands were stained with earth, their clothes damp with sweat, but both of them carried smiles as they loaded their produce onto the truck and drove down to the local market. The morning was lively, the market filled with the chatter of customers, the bargaining of merchants, and the rustling of fresh leaves and fruits. Linda, despite the weariness from the hard work, still felt the familiar joy of selling what their hands had nurtured. She was used to the fatigue, used to the sun and soil clinging to her skin, but that day, something was different. By the time they returned home, Linda felt an odd heaviness in her body. Her legs were sore beyond the usual ache, and her head throbbed with a dull pain that wouldn't fade. As she stepped into their cozy wooden house, a wave of nausea hit her suddenly and violently. She had to steady herself against the doorframe, closing her eyes to regain balance. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Quang noticed and asked with concern if she was okay, but Linda just waved it off, saying perhaps she was just too tired and needed some rest. She lay down on the bamboo bed, thinking that after a short nap, the discomfort would pass. Yet, as the hours ticked by, the tightness in her chest remained, and the dizziness returned every time she sat up. Something wasn't right. She stared at the wooden ceiling, her mind drifting uneasily, trying to recall if she had eaten something bad or caught a mild illness. But then, as her hand subconsciously rested on her abdomen, a sudden thought struck her. Her eyes widened. It couldn't be, could it? She quickly did a mental count, recalling her last period. She sat up with a start. She was late. Not just a few days, she had missed her period for more than 2 weeks. Her heart began to race. Could she be pregnant? The thought sent a surge of emotions swirling inside her: excitement, disbelief, anxiety, and a growing sense of hope. She remembered the little moments from the past weeks, how she had been more easily tired, how certain foods smelled stronger than usual, and how her body just didn't feel quite the same. Why hadn't she noticed sooner? For a long while, Linda sat silently on the bed, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the possibility. She didn't want to get her hopes up just yet. Maybe it was just stress, she reasoned. Maybe the exhaustion from farm work had taken a toll. But deep down, a small voice whispered otherwise. She needed to know for sure. Without telling Quang, Linda got up and hurriedly changed into fresh clothes. She grabbed her small purse and headed to the village pharmacy. Every step she took, her mind kept racing with the same question. What if I'm really pregnant? What if there's already a life growing inside me? Her heart pounded as she purchased a pregnancy test, her hands cold despite the warm midday sun. By the time she returned home, the queasy feeling had worsened, but so had her anticipation. She stared at the test kit in her hand for a few minutes, almost too nervous to open it. Finally, taking a deep breath, Linda stood up and walked into the bathroom. She had to know. Whether it was joy or disappointment waiting for her, she needed the truth. Standing alone in the small bathroom, Linda's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the pregnancy test. The house was quiet, save for the faint rustling of leaves outside and the occasional call of birds perched on the windowsill. She filled a small cup with water, her fingers cold despite the midday warmth, and followed the instructions with care. Every movement felt strangely significant, like a ritual that could change her life in an instant. Once the test was done, she placed it gently on the counter, her heart pounding as if she'd just sprinted across the fields. The next few minutes felt endless. She couldn't take her eyes off the white plastic stick, waiting for the lines to appear. Her mind played out 1,000 scenarios. What if it was just her body acting up? What if it was a false alarm? Yet with every tick of the clock, her pulse only grew louder, echoing in her ears. Then it happened. Slowly, like dawn breaking through a heavy fog, a second pink line began to emerge next to the first. Linda blinked hard, not trusting her own eyes. She picked up the test, brought it closer, and stared. 2 lines. Clear, undeniable. 2 bright, vivid lines. Her breath caught. She gasped, a hand flying to her mouth as tears welled up uncontrollably. She wasn't dreaming, this was real. She was pregnant. Inside her, a tiny life had already begun to grow, a piece of her and Quang's love taking form in the most miraculous way. She let out a shaky laugh, her tears now flowing freely, mixing joy, relief, and a kind of awe she'd never known before. Linda rushed out of the bathroom, barely remembering to wipe her tears. She didn't care about how disheveled she looked or how her cheeks were flushed with emotion. She had to tell Quang she needed to see his face, to share this wonder with him. She ran barefoot through the house and out to the garden where Quang was tending to the vegetable beds. The sun cast soft golden beams through the branches, but to Linda, the world seemed brighter, more alive than ever. Quang looked up just as she called his name, her voice shaking but filled with excitement. Quang! Quang, she cried, running toward him, still clutching the test in her hand. He straightened up, eyebrows furrowed in concern. What's wrong? Are you okay? But Linda shook her head, a wide, tearful smile on her face. She stopped right in front of him, breathless. I'm not sick, she whispered. I'm pregnant. For a moment, Quang stood frozen, as if the words hadn't fully reached him. He stared at her, then at the test stick she held out. When the realization sank in, his eyes widened with astonishment, and then pure joy. "Really?" he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Linda nodded, the tears still streaming down. Quang let out a disbelieving laugh, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around gently despite the shock still written on his face. "We're having a baby," he said softly, holding her close, his voice filled with wonder. "We're really going to have a baby." They stood there in the garden, under the sun and sky, wrapped in each other's arms, savoring the magic of that moment. Everything else, the farm, the market, the tiredness, faded into the background. All that mattered now was the tiny heartbeat beginning inside Linda, and the new chapter of life waiting just ahead. Quang couldn't wait another day. That very afternoon, he insisted on taking Linda to the town hospital for a proper checkup. He didn't want to leave anything to chance. The excitement in his eyes was uncontainable. He was like a child waiting to open his greatest gift, and Linda couldn't help but laugh at his eagerness. They drove down the winding dirt roads, the breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers, their hands intertwined the whole way. Linda leaned her head on Quang's shoulder, feeling a peaceful warmth in her chest, the kind of peace that came from knowing she was no longer alone. A tiny life was growing inside her. When they arrived at the hospital, Quang helped Linda out of the car with exaggerated care, almost as if she might break. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Linda teased, and they both chuckled, their laughter lightening every step. Yet, beneath their playfulness, both of them carried a quiet nervousness, the anticipation of hearing a doctor confirm the little miracle they'd only just discovered. Inside, the waiting room buzzed with the quiet murmur of patients and the occasional beeping of machines. Quang's leg bounced restlessly, his hand never leaving Linda's. When her name was finally called, they walked into the consultation room together, hearts pounding. The doctor, a gentle woman with kind eyes, welcomed them warmly and began the checkup with practiced grace. Then came the ultrasound, the moment they'd been waiting for. As the doctor moved the wand across Linda's abdomen, the screen flickered, and soon a tiny form appeared, nestled within a dark space. Linda held her breath, watching the image, while Quang's eyes locked onto the screen, wide and unblinking. "There," the doctor pointed with a soft smile. "That's your baby." In that instant, time seemed to stop for both of them. On the screen was the proof of life, small, delicate, but very much real. A tiny flutter of motion appeared, rhythmic and steady. The doctor turned up the sound, and suddenly, the soft but clear thumping of a heartbeat filled the room. "Your baby is 8 weeks old," the doctor announced, her voice warm. "Congratulations." Linda gasped, covering her mouth, eyes shimmering with tears again. Quang couldn't take his eyes off the screen, his child, already with a heartbeat, already alive. He squeezed Linda's hand tightly, his voice thick with emotion. "That's our baby. I can't believe it." Linda looked at him, their gazes meeting, both of them overwhelmed. "We're really going to be parents," she whispered. Once the scan was done, Linda, still wiping tears from her cheeks, gathered the courage to ask, "Doctor, can you tell if it's a boy or a girl?" The doctor chuckled softly. "It's a little early to tell. But if you wait until the next scan, you'll likely find out." Quang laughed, his eyes still sparkling. "Either way, it doesn't matter. As long as our baby is healthy." The doctor nodded, giving them a list of vitamins and advice on how Linda should care for herself in the coming months. As they left the hospital, Quang couldn't stop grinning. He held Linda close, his arm protective around her shoulders, already picturing the future, a little pair of feet running through their farm, laughter echoing under the trees, a small voice calling them Mom and Dad. Back home, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with strokes of orange and pink, Quang and Linda sat together on the porch, watching the twilight settle in. The world seemed softer, gentler, because now, everything had changed. They were no longer just husband and wife, they were soon to be a family. And that thought alone made every hardship, every long day on the farm, feel lighter than ever before.